very busy life with kids and all that. But at 34, I had a tragedy strike in my life, which changes your trajectory. My husband died suddenly of a heart attack, and I was on my own, a single mom with 2 kids, 6 and 7 years old, and my parents came to help me look after the kids so I could go to school and all the things you have to do to cope and make it all work. And we bought a leasehold on Musqueam First Nation land. And I am absolutely delighted today that 2 of my neighbors from those days, 2 warriors along with me, John and Lillian, are there at the back. And I'm so happy to see you, my fellow leasehold warriors from those days, because I haven't seen them in years. Just delighted to see you here today. And the reason I'm bringing that up, because I did get married again, and we had 2 more children, and on it goes, to my husband Brent, who I told you about, is that I understand the threat that is happening today with DRIPA and the land title issues. Because I've lived it, and I've litigated it, and we won that fight. But it was tough, right, John? Right, Lillian? It was tough. And Lillian said, I didn't know you'd recognize me. I said, oh my goodness, we fought in the trenches together. Of course you and John, I know you. But this is what happened. I'll try and not take too much time on this, but it's so very important in our province right now. When we moved in there, it had been a peaceful community for about 25 years. About 24 years. A year after I moved in, the federal government decided to transfer taxing authority from the city of Vancouver over to the Musqueam First Nation. No consultation, they just did it with the stroke of a pen. When I moved in there, I was paying property taxes to the city of Vancouver based on market value. That's what most of us, if we're lucky enough to own a home, understand. But they gave it over to First Nations. So the first problem with that is you are not allowed to represent yourself or your neighbors to a First Nation unless you are a band member. If you have a dispute with your city, even though it's not easy, you are allowed to go to a council meeting or make a representation to a councillor or mayor. If you're under First Nation governance, it doesn't work that way. You have no right of representation. Secondly, then the provincial government said, Musqueam, you can keep all those property taxes. You don't have to remit 50% for schools, and you don't have to remit for the other things that the city remits for. You keep it all. Third thing, the BC government said, we are going to change the BC Assessment Act. And this was all under a previous NDP government. So under the BC Assessment Act, they changed how property is assessed on Aboriginal land and said, leasehold will no longer be assessed at market value. Going forward, it will be assessed based on comparable freehold or fee simple off reserve. Well, the difference then was about double. You could buy leasehold for about half the amount that you could buy fee simple for. It's even more now. It's kind of triple now at least. So suddenly, it's not that they changed the rate of your taxes, but because it was assessed differently, you immediately were paying double the property taxes that you were before. So now you're being taxed double with no representation. Then the third thing that happened was there was a clause in the lease that there would be a renegotiation of the yearly amount that the leaseholders paid. And they were willing to do that. That's the way the lease was. And they offered, on average, it had something to do with the size of your property, but the average was about $8,800 a year they offered. The band, or the First Nation, wanted $36,000 a year, on average. That was impossible for pretty much everyone living there. a young lawyer like me with 4 children now, or we had over 30% seniors are retired on those lands. There was about 150 families affected. So we protested and said, we can't pay that, and that's not reasonable, it's not fair. But remember, you can't actually have an audience with the First Nation unless they let you. And there were canceled meetings, there was slow rolling. It just didn't happen. So then the First Nation sued all the leaseholders. So suddenly we were defendants in a lawsuit over this amount in dispute. And there was so much misinformation, disinformation. People said, oh, you weren't paying them and you were saving up your money to sue them and then you sued them. I said, no, we didn't sue. They sued us. Anyway, that court case went from the local BC court trial level to the BC Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. I, as a lawyer, was the instructing counsel, meaning I was the one liaising with the legal counsel, but I couldn't be a lead counsel because I was directly involved. However, I could be with the team when they went to the Supreme Court of Canada and was very much a part of all that. And we won. We won that case. And the Supreme Court said that there had to be a discount because of Aboriginal governance and because of the uncertainty. But what happened along the way, and this is why this is so very relevant 25 years later to what all British Columbians are facing today. What happened along the way, nobody took our title away. You've heard Musqueam First Nation and the government saying, no one's after your title. But they sucked all the equity out of that title. It's a confiscation of assets. And when they suck that equity out, what happens? Appraisers can't appraise fair market value. Therefore, banks will not lend. You could not refinance. You could not mortgage, and you could not buy or sell. That's what happened. Nobody came and took your deed away from you, but the value of that deed was gone. And that would continue for many, many years. Some people lost their homes, went bankrupt over it. Others managed to just stay on and, cope. But when I say, and I have said publicly before, that the fear is real, the issues are serious, I know what I'm talking about. I've lived it, I've litigated it, I understand it. And no one is going to understand this complex, multi-layered issue more than someone has seen the effects, but also, in this case, as a lawyer, can see what the issues are and how we have to tackle it. So when I talk about repealing DRIPA, I am very serious about that. And then people say, well, what do you replace it with? I believe most people understand economic partnerships, economic development. It is not that I want to deny First Nations their economic development, but we need to do it in a partnership, one that works for all British Columbians. Indigenous people make up 5% of our population. So who is speaking for the other 95%? That is the issue. And I've heard many people say, including First Nations leaders, just let the courts work it out. They'll work it out. It's not that simple. Who is representing the Crown in these hearings? The government of the day. The government of the day instructs the legal counsel. The government of the day gives, well, first of all, they hire the legal counsel. Secondly, they instruct them. And just what happened many years ago in one of the first cases of Delgamuukw, another NDP government, then under Mike Harcourt, that case was won for the Crown at the trial level. And then the NDP government changed the lawyers and changed their instructions. And they said, do not defend private property rights. We're not doing that. We're not standing up for that. So the Crown lost at the Court of Appeal, and they lost at the Supreme Court of Canada. But that was because the Crown, represented by the government, took a different position. Any of you who've seen this Cowichan decision and worried about it, as we all should be, will note that the judge said neither the provincial government nor the federal government took any position with respect to primacy, superiority of our land title system over DRIPA governance. That evidence was not before me at all. So we have two levels of government, but today we're here talking about BC, where they've abandoned the field for the 95% of us. That has to change, or we are going to be in disorder and chaos over our assets, our property, for a very long time. So that's why I offer myself up as someone who is a fighter and who believes we must fight, we must take a strong position, and sometimes you need a leader who's going to fight behind enemy lines, right? One of the positions I had with the federal government was I was Associate Minister of National Defense. And when I held that role, they would say, you got to find your battle rhythms. Oh, any of you old soldiers or veterans here would know what I mean by that. You have to know where you're going, you need the focus, and you need to have your team and your troops, so to speak, alongside you, shoulder to shoulder, and you need to have the vision that you can fix this and you can change it, and you march forward with your battle rhythms. We've got a lot of issues to talk about today, and then I'm happy to take questions. But another big issue we're dealing with is SOGI in our schools. And I am very disappointed